It all started with sirens, not the kind that warn of danger from afar, but the kind that pull up right next to you when you've done absolutely nothing wrong. Maya Benson didn't even understand what was happening at first. One moment she was helping her 6-year-old son zip up his jacket after he dropped his ice cream. The next, 2 police officers were walking toward her, hands resting on their belts, eyes sharp and questioning. Before we go deeper into what happened that day, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? What city? What place? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button, because this story, it's one you'll never forget. Now let's go back to the park, to the moment everything went wrong. It was a bright afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Children laughed, swings creaked, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass. Maya had taken her son Ethan to the park after school, just like she always did. They played tag, shared snacks, and sat together on the bench while he told her stories about his day. For a moment, life felt peaceful, simple, warm, and safe. But safety can disappear in an instant. Across the playground, a woman watched them, pale, tall, with an expression that flickered between curiosity and suspicion. Her gaze lingered too long, too sharp, too focused on something that should have looked ordinary: a mother and her child. A few minutes later, a police cruiser rolled into the parking lot. The officers stepped out, speaking quietly into their radios. The woman pointed toward Maya. The next moment, they were beside her. "Ma'am, can we speak with you? We've had a report about a possible abduction." Maya froze. Ethan looked up at her, confused. "Abduction?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "He's my son." But the officers didn't step back. They asked for identification, for proof. Ethan began to cry, clutching her arm. Around them, the world stopped. Parents turned, whispers spread, phones appeared, recording the scene like a spectacle. "I'm his mother," Maya said again, her voice breaking now. "Please, you're scaring him." One of the officers sighed, uncertain, but the other remained stern. "We just need to confirm, ma'am. Please cooperate." She showed them her ID, her car registration, even Ethan's school pass. It wasn't enough. They asked about the father, about where they lived, about why Ethan's skin was lighter than hers. Maya felt her heart pounding against her ribs. The kind of fear that comes not from guilt, but from the knowledge that no one believes you. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. Finally, after verifying her information, the officers stepped aside. "You're free to go," one said quietly, as if doing her a favor. But the eyes around them, cold, judgmental, unblinking, said otherwise. Maya gathered Ethan, who was still crying, and left the park in silence. By that evening, the story had already spread. Someone had filmed the entire encounter and posted it online with the caption, "Black woman caught trying to kidnap white child." The video went viral before nightfall. Strangers argued in the comments, some defending her, others calling for her arrest. No one cared to learn the truth, that Ethan's father was white, that Maya was his mother, that the only crime she'd committed was existing in the wrong skin at the wrong moment. 2 days later, the school called. The principal's voice was polite but cold. "Mrs. Benson, we'll need to see additional proof of custody for Ethan. It's just a precaution." A precaution, as if love needed to be notarized. When Maya picked Ethan up, she noticed other parents whispering. Some pulled their children a little closer as she passed. One of her neighbors crossed the street instead of greeting her. She could feel the distance forming, invisible but heavy as stone. At home, she sat in silence, watching her son color at the kitchen table. Every line of crayon on paper felt like a small piece of normal she was trying to hold on to. Ethan looked up and asked, "Mommy, why were those police angry at us?" She couldn't answer. How do you explain prejudice to a child who still believes everyone plays fair? That night she barely slept. The images replayed over and over, flashing lights, the weight of stairs, the sound of Ethan's cries. She knew it wouldn't end with that one day in the park. Once the world decides who you are, it takes more than truth to change its mind. The next morning she found an envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside, a newspaper clipping of the viral story and a note scrawled in black marker. "Keep your papers ready next time." Her hands shook as she read it. The fear wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what could happen again, anywhere, anytime. The park wasn't safe. The school wasn't safe. Even her home didn't feel safe. But under all that fear, something else began to stir. Anger, and the quiet resolve that comes when you realize silence only feeds injustice. Maya looked at her reflection in the window that night and whispered, "They think they can define me, but they're wrong." She didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything began to change. Because some battles you never choose. They find you. And when they do, you either break or you rise. Maya Benson chose to rise. She would no longer accept humiliation as the price of peace. If she had to fight to prove the truth, she would. Not just for herself, but for her son, and for every mother who had ever been questioned for simply loving her child. She took a deep breath, held Ethan's hand, and stepped into the next day, ready to face whatever came next. Because now she understood. This wasn't about one misunderstanding. It was about something much bigger. And she was done being silent. It all began with humiliation, but now it had turned into a battle for dignity. Maya Benson refused to be defined by a misunderstanding born from prejudice. After the incident in the park, her world started to shrink. People she once greeted with a smile now looked away. When she arrived at her son's school, she hoped for understanding, but what she found instead was a wall of polite suspicion. The principal smiled tightly, his words measured, his tone calm, yet his eyes avoided hers. "You have to understand, Mrs. Benson. We just need to verify everything. It's protocol." His reassurance felt like a quiet accusation. Maya walked out of that office trembling with anger, clutching her bag as though it held the last piece of her strength. But things only got worse. Photos of her from that day began circulating online. Headlines twisted the story, comments overflowed with judgment. Some people defended her, calling the incident what it was, racial profiling. But others were cruel. They called her names, questioned her motherhood, and said the police were right to stop her. Her boss called her into the office the next morning. "We're just concerned about the attention this might bring," he said, eyes flickering toward the door as if he couldn't wait for her to leave. Maya realized then that when society decides you are guilty, innocence becomes a battle you must fight alone. She knew she couldn't let this continue. So she found someone who still believed in fairness, Mrs. Harper, a retired lawyer with silver hair and eyes sharp with conviction. Harper listened quietly, then said, "If you let them silence you, they'll keep doing this to others. We'll fight." Together they filed an official complaint. Against the police, against the false reports, and against the system that allowed a lie to ruin someone's name. But justice came with a price. Journalists camped outside her house. Neighbors whispered when she passed by. Little Ethan started waking up from nightmares, afraid the police would take him away. Maya tried to stay strong for him, but each day chipped away at her spirit. She reached out to local news stations, hoping to tell her side of the story, but her words were dismissed on air. "You're overreacting," one reporter told her off camera. It was just a misunderstanding. People need to move on. But how could she move on from being treated like a criminal in front of her child? One evening, as she returned home, her eyes caught something on the mailbox. Red paint spelling one word: kidnapper. Her hands trembled, her chest tightened, and she fell to her knees. That night, as Ethan slept, Maya stared at her reflection in the darkened window and whispered, "I have to end this. I won't let him grow up afraid." The next morning, she began to collect everything: security footage from the park, witness statements, police radio logs, any trace of truth she could find. She learned that the 911 call had been placed by a woman named Mrs. Langford, one of the mothers from the park. Langford lived in an upscale neighborhood nearby and was known for her connections and her comments. "She's not like us," Maya had overheard her say once at a school meeting. Now it all made sense. Prejudice had worn a polite face, a perfect smile, and had nearly destroyed her life. Days later, Maya received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was quiet, uncertain. "Mrs. Benson, it's Officer Diaz. I was one of the officers that day. I can't sleep. I wanted to say I'm sorry." His words hung in the air like something fragile and rare. Honesty. He told her that the call wasn't random, that Mrs. Langford had directly contacted the precinct and described Maya as suspicious for walking with a child who didn't look like her. "We shouldn't have acted that way," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "It wasn't right." Maya thanked him softly, though her hands shook as she hung up the phone. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every mother who had ever been judged for the color of her skin, every child forced to watch their parent treated like a suspect. The pain had turned into purpose. With Officer Diaz's confession, Maya finally had the peace she needed. Proof that the incident wasn't a misunderstanding, but a reflection of something deeper and crueler. Mrs. Harper urged her to stay cautious. "This could bring more attention, Maya. They won't all like what you're about to reveal." Maya nodded, her voice steady. "Let them see it. Let them see what they've done." She looked at her son, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, and knew what she had to do. She would not hide anymore. She would face the cameras, the whispers, the judgment, because the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could set them free. Now she had a choice. Stay silent and let the world move on, or speak up and force it to see what it refused to acknowledge. And Maya Benson had made her choice. She was going to speak. The truth was coming, and this time it would be heard. When the story of Maya Benson finally reached the public, it did not begin with anger, but with quiet truth. A local journalist, the same one who had once dismissed her plea, now invited her to speak live on air. Maya sat beneath the studio lights, her voice calm but firm, telling how an ordinary afternoon in the park had turned into a nightmare that stripped her of her dignity. She spoke of how prejudice hid behind polite words, how a single call of suspicion became a storm that nearly destroyed her peace, her work, and her trust in people. As her words spread across the airwaves, the world listened, not to a headline but to a mother who simply wanted to be believed. When the broadcast ended, a video began to circulate online. It was footage from a police body camera showing Maya standing by the swings, explaining that the child beside her was her son. The officers hesitated, clearly unsure, yet they still detained her. Not because of evidence, but because of one voice on the phone, a stranger's assumption shaped by color. The video went viral. Outrage filled the comment sections. People began to question how something so cruel could happen in plain sight. The police department issued a public apology, and soon after, the woman who had made the call stepped forward, her face pale on camera, whispering an apology that could never undo the harm. Maya received hundreds of messages from mothers across the country, women of all colors, sharing stories of fear, of being misjudged, of walking through life aware that the world didn't always see them as they truly were. Her lawyer, Mrs. Harper, told her softly one evening, "You didn't just defend yourself, Maya. You made them see what they refused to look at." Months passed and the storm began to calm, but Maya knew silence wasn't enough anymore. She created a community initiative to train police officers in cultural awareness and teach empathy in action, not as theory, but as responsibility. She visited schools, spoke at city meetings, stood in rooms where once she would have been ignored, and people listened. Her story had become a movement. One morning, she and Ethan returned to that same park where everything had begun. The sky was bright, and laughter filled the air. Ethan held her hand tightly as they walked past the swings. He looked up and asked in a soft voice, "Mom, do they know now? That you're my mom?" Maya smiled, her eyes warm but steady. "Yes, baby," she said. "Now everyone knows." For a moment, the past seemed to fade. The whispers, the stares, the humiliation. What remained was something purer. A mother and her child, hand in hand, stronger than the fear that once tried to separate them. And as they walked forward, it was as if the world had finally learned something too, because strength is not always loud. It is not in revenge or anger. True strength lies in dignity, in standing firm when everything pushes you down, in choosing truth over bitterness, and in believing that compassion can still change hearts. Sometimes it takes one story, one voice, one mother's courage to remind us all what humanity truly means. So if you believe in stories that reveal truth, if you stand for justice, for love, and for respect, take a moment to support this one. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story so that no one's truth is ever silenced again.